Namo Buddhaya, and welcome to the Buddha Dharma TV Sunday program. I am Lisa Chu. Today we will begin our program with a piece of music from the Zen Buddhist tradition. The presentation is unique, pleasing, and calming to your mind. Here is something to tranquil your mind, calming Buddhist instrumental music. When the mind is troubled or restless, gentle Buddhist instrumental music can help bring peace and stillness within. The soft melodies of flutes, bell, and strings create a sacred atmosphere that help reduce worries, slow down thoughts, and open the heart to inner serenity. Just sit quietly, close your eyes, and let the soothing sound guide you into the deep state of calmness and mindfulness. Our next item is by a British monk, Venerable Ananda Jyoti, on the geography of Buddhism, which shows where the events in Lord Buddha's life and the sasana, the dispensation of the Buddha, developed thereafter. In this talk, Venerable Ananda Jyoti focused on the development of the state of Magadha, from a small but influential kingdom during the time of Lord Buddha to its height under the great Asukan Empire, which also highlights the Buddha's mission to Sri Lanka. There are many newly created maps to support the talk, along with illustrative photographs of early Buddhist arts and murals depicting the Buddhist mission. These talks are rich in facts and based on advanced research. Please make the best use of this rare opportunity to receive first-hand information. This is the second and final part of the Venerable's valuable talk.
Then Brahma came to the Buddha and requested him to teach, because the Buddha was thinking, anyway, it tells, the Buddha was thinking maybe people can't get this, maybe it's too difficult, they can't get it. So, also you see, now the Brahma is, the Nagas are the head of the folk cults, what we could call the folk cults. That means the local, the local gods in the area. Yeah, so they had already kind of paid homage in their own way, protecting the Buddha. Now the head of the Brahminical divinities comes and then gets down on one knee and requests the Buddha to start teaching. You see, what it's telling psychologically, if you like, what it's telling is that now the local gods are paying respect to the Buddha. Now the Brahminical gods are also acknowledging that the Buddha knows more than what they know, and that he has to make this teaching. If he makes this teaching, people can attain Nibbana, but they can't attain Nibbana through the Brahminical religion. Psychologically, that's what it's telling, you see. We have this idea of the Brahma God coming down. So, it can be true as well. The gods come to somebody with purified mind, of course, like this. But what it's telling is that the Brahminical gods now pay respect to the Buddha. So the Brahma God, Brahma Sahampati, requested the Buddha to start teaching, and then the Buddha, after he considered it, the Buddha agreed to make that teaching. And then he looked round to see who was worthy to teach. So he thought of Alara Kalama, who was his first meditation teacher, you can say. But Alara Kalama had died 1 week before. And the Buddha was actually said, he said something like, it's such a shame. If Alara Kalama had heard this teaching, he would have attained enlightenment immediately. But he didn't get the chance because he'd already passed away 1 week before. And then he thought of Uddaka Ramaputta, who was his next teacher. And also Rama had passed away the night before. And he also thought the same thing. If he'd have heard this teaching, he would have been able to attain enlightenment straight away, because he was already at a very high level. You see, he just needed like the trigger, just like the push, just to kind of fall into it, because the mind would have been very purified. You see, so he was not there either. Then he thought of the group of 5 ascetics. So then with his Buddha eye, he surveyed northern India, and then he knew that the 5 ascetics were staying at Isipatana, north of Varanasi. It was the capital. It's the capital of Kazi. That's a different state. Magadha is where he attained awakening. Yeah. Kazi, it's a big state. It's like this sort of size. It was one of the biggest places in northern India at that time. So that's the state of Kashi, and the capital was Varanasi. So this is about, from here, which was the area where he'd attained awakening, to there, is about 200 kilometers. You can walk about 25, 30 kilometers a day if you kind of, if you're going. So this it says about a week, you see, because what we know is this. The Buddha attained awakening at Vesak, and he gave his first teaching at Asala, which is in July, the full moon in July, 2 months later. So in the early text, it just only tells you about 4 weeks. Yeah. It doesn't say that there's only those 4 weeks, but it only tells you about 4 weeks. So the commentary has built it up so it's 7 weeks. And at the end of those 7 weeks, he very quickly goes across to Isipatana, you see. In fact, in the commentaries, in the Pali commentaries, it tells he did it in 1 night. I don't believe it myself, because in other early texts it tells it took a week. And a week is a reasonable time, you see. And it also tells who gave him danas on the way during that week and who he met. Then he went into Varanasi and went Pindapat, because this was the major conurbation, the major built-up area. And then he went out to Isipatana, which if you've been, you'll see is about 15 kilometers outside. It was a deer park, and that's where he met the disciples and gave the first teaching. So this is 2 months. A lot of time around here, 6, 7 weeks are in this area after the awakening. Then say a week to get across, and then he's there. And he gave the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, in which he describes the 4 Noble Truths and the Eightfold Noble Path, which are the kind of core teachings that the Buddha had discovered. See, that was the Buddha's big discovery, was the middle path. Before then, there was this extreme asceticism or indulgence, and the Buddha discovered this path that goes by the middle. You're neither starving the body nor indulging the body, but just kind of maintaining it in a reasonably healthy way, so the mind can also have a chance for development. So that was the teaching he gave. But at that time, only one attained to the first path. Only Anya Kondanya attained to Sotapanna. There were 5 listening, the others didn't get it. Not straight away. And then afterwards, the Buddha continued teaching, but we have no record of that teaching. All that teaching has been lost. Now you'll be surprised if later when I tell you how long all this goes on, and so little teaching that was remembered. But the Buddha was teaching every day, and eventually the other monks also attained Sotapanna, and then they attained Sakadagami, and then they attained Anagami. After a week, all 5 were at Anagami stage. That means they're non-returners. They're not going to return to this world. If they were to die at that time, they would get reborn in the Pure Lands, and from the Pure Lands they would attain Nibbana. It's at that point that the Buddha taught the second discourse that we have recorded, which is the Anatta Lakkhana Sutta, the discourse on non-self. A very important discourse, because when the monks heard that discourse, all 5 of them attained awakening. Yeah. It's on the realization of anatta, of this non-self nature of the human person, that the first people ever attained full awakening, you see. So that's why it's actually a really important teaching. In a way it's kind of difficult, but it's not really difficult, But somehow it's kind of presented in a difficult way. It's always presented in this kind of Abhidhamic context and everything like that. But it's not really such a difficult teaching. It can be presented in other ways, you know, and it becomes much more meaningful and everything. It's just like the person you are now is not the person you are when you're 16. If you look back on that person, well, you're a very different person. And the person you are now is not the person you will be when you're 70. You're going to be a very different person when you're 70. Yeah? And the person you are now is not the same person you were when you were in your previous life. That's what it means when it's talking about anatta. There's no permanent, solid, enduring entity. All there is development. There's a developing personality. It develops through a life, and it develops through lives. Like that. It's for some reason it's always surrounded with all these kind of Abhidhamic terms and everything like that, but it makes it so complicated and so kind of difficult for people to understand. But you can just understand as you've developed yourself during your life, so you've developed over lives, over many lives. But that's also a revelation, you see, because there was two ideas at Lord Buddha's time, which was that and two ideas now also, yeah, which is that at the end of the life, like the scientific idea, at the end of the life, then the person dies and that's the end. There's nothing more. And the other idea is you go eternally to heaven. You know, you become an eternal being. In fact, you always were an eternal being, but you realize your eternal destiny. Either you go eternally to hell, or you go eternally to heaven. Like this. So in Lord Buddha's time, these two ideas were there as well. Majjhima Patipada, the middle path, goes through that. It's neither that there's an eternal entity, or that the entity that you are is cut off. What there is a developmental path. Normally our Sala full moon is in July, and July is when the rains retreat begins. And the monks stay for 3 months in the monastery. Yeah. So same for the Lord Buddha. He spent that first 3 months at Isipatana, because it was at the Asala full moon that he taught the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta. So they've already entered into the rains retreat. So he spent the next 3 months. During that time, Yasa came out from Varanasi. Yasa was a rich man, also the son of a merchant. Again, you see, this merchant class very important. He was the son of a merchant. He came out to Isipatana, and then he heard the teaching of the Lord Buddha, and he attained awakening as well. So at that point there's 7 people awakened. Buddha, 5 monks, and Yasa. After Yasa, his mother and father came looking for him. So when his mother and father came looking for him, originally the Buddha hid him by his psychic power. He hid him away, and then afterwards he showed him to his mother and father. Once he was sure that they would not want to take him back, you know, he kind of confirmed that if he'd attained awakening, that they wouldn't try to take him back, because you know, all families want their sons, you know, to carry on the family and everything. This is the problem. So the wife, Yasa's mother, Yasa's father came out looking for him, and they also attained to Sotapanna. And at that point they went for refuge. So they went for the 3 refuges, because there's a Sangha now. So they're the first lay people to go for 3 refuges. Then Yasa's friends, 4 friends came, also from the merchant class, and they also attained awakening. So then there's 11. And then 50 of his friends from Varanasi also heard what was going on, you see. They heard that their friends had gone to this teacher, they've attained awakening, you know, and everything like this. So it's not unreasonable, I don't think. You know, if you heard that your friend had just attained awakening, they'd gone to a side or up the road or something and attained awakening, you'd go along as well. So 50 of his friends came out, and they also heard the teaching, but we don't know what the teaching was. You know, there's no remembrance of this teaching. This is long before Ananda is on the scene or anything, you see. So they all attained awakening. So there's 61 people have attained awakening at this point, and that's in the first 3 months of the teaching. Not the first 3 months after the awakening, but the first 3 months after the teaching started. At the end of the Vasana, then the Buddha made this very famous thing, which was he sent all the monks that that had attained awakening, and he sent them out and he told them, go and teach for the happiness of the many folk. Don't go by the same path. Go by different paths out into the various areas and start giving the teaching. So that's actually what they did. They went out and they started teaching themselves, because they had attained awakening as well. So they can also teach. So they were all sent out, and the Buddha said, and I am going to go back to Gaya. Right, so he went on this journey back to Gaya. Now there's a very interesting thing about this. There's 60 other people who have attained awakening, and we know the names of quite a few of them, like 7 or 8 of them, and none of these monks ever appear again. They just disappear off the face of the earth. It's very odd. They appear in the commentaries, but they don't appear again in the suttas. So the Buddha started going back over to Gaya, and then there's another famous incident where he met the good group of 30. This was 30, in fact they're romantic couples, 29 couples who, you know, his boyfriends and girlfriends. They'd gone out into the forest to frolic, if we can say like that. So they went out to frolic, and one of them didn't have a girlfriend, so he took a prostitute. But this prostitute took his money and ran away. Right? And then as the Buddha was going through, it's around this area somewhere it must have been, you see, as the Buddha was going through, they said, have you seen this woman who's run away with this money and everything? Did you see her? And the Buddha said, you shouldn't be chasing after a woman, you should look for yourself. So then he taught this group of 30 as well, and all this 30 also attained awakening. Those also we never hear about again. We don't know their names, of course, so they may have appeared, but we don't hear about this group of 30 again. They also just disappear off the face of the earth. So he came back to Gaya, and that's where he meets the Kassapa brothers. The Kassapa brothers were Brahmins, actually. Kassapa is it's actually a Brahminical clan name. One of these brothers had 500 followers, one had 300, one had 200. So there was 1,000 of them. Not all living together, but living along this river. Living in various places along this river. One of the ashrams was an ashram with 500 of them living in that ashram. It's quite, it's quite a substantial place. And then the Buddha went there, and he asked if he could stay the night, and they said, and the Kassapa, it means Uravela, Kassapa gave him permission to stay, and he said he wanted to stay in the firehouse. And Kassapa said, you can't stay there because there's a Naga living in that firehouse. He'll do you damage. And the Buddha said, he's not going to be able to harm me. It's okay, you let me stay there. So he stayed there, and then there was this kind of contest. during the night where they would the Naga would flare up into like a big flame and everything, and then the Buddha would flare up into an even bigger flame like this. So they were this kind of contest overnight, and in the morning the Buddha got hold of the Naga and he put him in his begging bowl, and then he showed it to Uruvela Kassapa. Quite good. It's also like these kind of psychological stories again, isn't it? Because he's overcome the kind of he's demonstrating that he can overcome these local guards. He can tame them. He can even carry them in his alms bowl. In actual fact, in our text, it tells that he carried out something like 7 miracles. This was one of the miracles. He carried out other sorts of miracles as well. Like, he went right up to the Himalayas, and he managed to get a mango, and then he brought it all the way back, and he beat Uruvela Kassapa to the Dhanasala, to the dining hall. He travelled 2,000 miles or whatever it is, and managed to do this, you see. So that was another miracle like this. He was doing all these kind of different miracles, kind of proving his superiority over Kassapa, because Kassapa wouldn't accept that he was inferior to the Buddha. But eventually he realized that the Buddha has more powers. In fact, Kassapa, we kept saying, this guy is very powerful, but he's not an arahat like I am. That's what it says at the end of each of these miracles. It says, well, he can perform this miracle, but he's not an arahat like I am. 7 times he says this. In fact, at the end, the Buddha thinks to himself, whatever I do, this guy still thinks he's an arahat. I'd better put him straight. I'd better put him straight about this. And he says, you're not an arahat. You're not even on the path to becoming an arahat. And then Kassapa realized it's true. He's not an arahat. The Buddha is an arahat, but he's not an arahat. He's not even on the path, but the Buddha can show him the path. So then he worshipped the Buddha. There's an interesting sequence to this. And then also converted the other brothers and their thing. And then he taught, all these people were worshipping fire. They were fire worshippers, worshipping Agni. So the Buddha taught the fire sermon. It's the 3rd of the teachings that we have record of, is the fire sermon, Ardita Pariyaya, where he describes what is really on fire. Yeah, what is on fire is, what the important fire is not this fire. The important fire is the eye is on fire. The ear is on fire, the nose is on fire, the tongue is on fire, the body is on fire. It's on fire with greed, hatred and delusion. That's the 3rd discourse, you see. He teaches these fire worshippers what a real fire is. All the way through his ministry you can find that the Buddha is doing this. He meets people halfway. You're interested in fire? Then I can tell you a fire story. So they all attained, that's 1,000 then, you see, attained awakening. And then from there they went to Rajagaha, because he had made a promise to teach King Bimbisara after he had awakened. So he went then to fulfill his promise. So he went back and he met with King Bimbisara. In fact, it tells that King Bimbisara and his courtiers and 8,000 Brahmins came out to meet the Buddha, because the news had gone ahead. But they didn't know, is the Buddha a disciple of Uruvela Kassapa, or is Kassapa the disciple of the Buddha? You see, they didn't know what it was on. They knew this big kind of flock of saints were approaching and everything, but they didn't know which way around it was. So when they kind of met, that means when these two groups met, then Uruvela Kassapa worshipped the Buddha. He said like this, I am the disciple, you are my teacher. He told like this in front of everybody, so nobody's confused about who is the actual teacher. Then it says, in the Pali, it says that the Buddha gave a teaching. But it doesn't tell what the teaching was. It tells that he gave a teaching to this group, that means King Bimbisara and the courtiers and the Brahmins. But there's no record of the teaching, you know. This is now 2 months to there, 3 months at Isipatana during the rains retreat, at least a couple of months to get back. So we're talking about 7 months after the awakening. We're talking about winter time. We've only got 3 discourses recorded in 7 months. Imagine what all those other teachings would have been. Would have been nice to know, eh? But we don't know. And then he gave the 4th discourse, but the Pali has lost the discourse. But in Mahavastu, which is another early text, in there the 4th discourse is recorded. So I translated that because people don't know it from the Theravada tradition, from the Pali tradition. They don't know this discourse, but it's remembered in the other thing, and it's quite an impressive discourse as well. So that's the 4th discourse of the Buddha at that point. Then, coming towards the end of winter, they had also heard about the Buddha attaining awakening in Kapilavastu. The news has spread. It's gone up from Rajagaha, it's gone through Vaisali, it's gone up to Kapilavastu. And his father wants to see him. And his family, I suppose. You know, but his father wants to see him. Because his father hasn't seen him for over 6 years. And 7 years by now, of course. It must be, almost 7 years. So the father sent down some embassies to go down to Rajagaha and invite him to come home, come to Kapilavastu, and he can give teachings there. The problem was they sent down these ministers, and they took like 1,000 people with them, but they all attained awakening, and then they didn't give the message. And that apparently it happened, or supposedly it happened 9 times. So there was 10,000 of these Sakyas all stuck in Rajagaha. All of them awakened, and none of them remembered the message they were supposed to give, which is, come back to Kapilavastu. So the next one, they sent down Kaludai. It means black Udai. They sent down Udai, who was one of the ministers. In the, one of the Sakyan ministers, and he put cotton in his ears so he wouldn't hear the teaching before he gave the message, and then he gave the message, and he described. Actually, in one of the texts I translated, Jina Charita, he gives a beautiful description of the springtime in Kapilavastu. He's describing the springtime in Kapilavastu and why he should go home and see it. You can all remember. Well, you're not in exile. I'm in exile, so I can remember spring in England. It's really beautiful because it's all barren over the winter and everything. And then during the spring, all the snow's clear. And then the flowers come out, and then the trees start blossoming and everything, you see. So if anybody wanted to get me back to England, they would have to describe the springtime, you see. So that's what Udayi did for the Buddha. He described the springtime in Kapilavastu. So then the Buddha, anyway, agreed to go back to Kapilavastu. So it's a long walk again, you see. It's about 300 kilometers from 320 kilometers, I think I worked it out one time, from Rajagaha to Kapilavastu. You can't do it so quickly, It's going to take some time. He went up to Kapilavastu, and then he went on alms round in Kapilavatthu itself, and the king, if you remember, was very upset, because the king was saying, nobody in my family has ever gone for alms. They're a princely family, they're a kingly family, they don't go begging as it's looked upon. But here is Siddhartha, who is Siddhartha Gautama, and he's going begging, you see, like that. And then the Buddha made this very kind of, in a way it's a poignant thing that he said. He said to the king, you're talking about the kingly lineage. The kingly lineage, they don't go begging, but I'm the Buddha lineage. Yeah, his primary lineage, that means his primary descent, is not his physical descent, but his spiritual descent. It's quite powerful in a way, you see. It connects him up to all the previous Buddhas in his thing. And the Buddhas do go pindapat. Yeah. So then the king, he can't argue with that, you see what I mean? His lineage is through the Buddhas. It's secondary that his lineage is through the king. And then he met Yasodhara, and then she also, during that period, I think she attained Sotapanna at that point, but during that, later she also attained awakening and became very famous Arahant nun. We have verses in the Therigatha. That's the verses that the nuns gave after they attained awakening. There's a book in the Tripitaka called Therigatha. Then his son also came out, and his son, 7-year-old son Rahula, his son was, 7 years old because he had left 7 years before. So his son was also asking for his inheritance. So again, you see, just like the king is trying to put the lineage through the material lineage, and the Buddha says it's not a material lineage that's important, it's a spiritual lineage. So the son was trying to claim his material inheritance, and the Buddha gave him his spiritual inheritance. He ordained him on the spot. Then afterwards, another interesting detail, afterwards, King Suddhodana said, you shouldn't just ordain people without getting permission. And the Buddha said, yeah, okay, I understand that. That's perfectly true. They should have their parents' permission before they're ordained. And even to this day, monks cannot ordain unless they've got permission from their parents. Yeah? You must take permission from your parents. That comes from the time when the Buddha just quickly ordained his son. Like this, and then his father complained about it. He said, you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't do that. It's not good, you see. You should get permission first. So the Buddha was very amenable, If people would say, you shouldn't do this, he would consider it, and if he thought it was right, he would go along with it. And people say, sometimes he in the rules in the Vinaya, many times he changes his mind, People say, oh, this is not right like that. And he will change his mind and he will do it a different way. And they'll say, oh no, it's not right like that either. And he will change his mind again, he'll do it a different way. Many times in the Vinaya, he's very flexible. So then the other person, that was Yasodhara has gone forth, and Rahula has gone forth, and the third person that was very important was his half-brother, Nanda. That means Mahapajapati's son. Mahapajapati was his mother's sister, and also the person who brought him up. But she also had children of her own. One of those was Nanda. So Nanda was very, very infatuated with his wife. There's a beautiful retelling of this story by Venerable Ashwaghosa, who was one of probably the finest Sanskrit poet that lived. He wrote a life of the Buddha, which is very well known, and he also wrote Soundarananda, which is this story of how the Buddha converted his brother Nanda, or his half-brother Nanda. And Nanda was very infatuated with his wife, very much in love. But the Buddha, as he was coming from alms round one day, he gave his alms bowl to Nanda. And then Nanda didn't know what to do, so he just followed him all the way back to the forest where they were living, the place where they were staying, like that. And when he got back, he ordained him, just like he ordained Rahul, you see. He gave him ordination. And then Nanda really didn't want to be ordained because he was in love with his wife and he wanted to go back to his wife. And he was thinking about his wife and he was getting thin and all this sort of thing. So the Buddha grabbed him by the arm and he took him to heaven. And then he showed him all the heavenly nymphs and he said, if you live the holy life in the way I'm teaching it, at the end of it, this is what you get. And then he said, who is more beautiful? The nymphs in heaven or your wife on earth? Like that. He says, my wife on earth is like a disfigured monkey. So he lost his lust for his wife, you see. And then he put himself into the practice, thinking he's going to get these nymphs at the end. He put himself in the practice and he really strove hard and he attained arahatship. When he attained arahatship, he went to the Buddha and he said, those nymphs in heaven, I don't need them anymore. I don't need any heavenly nymphs anymore. Please release me from that thing. And the Buddha said, the moment you attained arahatship, you were released from any kind of vows or promises that you have made. It's also a nice story. This is told in about 16 cantos, that means 16 books in Ashwagosha's story. But it's also told in our scriptures as well. But it's very elaborately told in Ashwagosha's story. Very nice. So that was the third of his relatives. But also the other Sakyans like Ananda and Mahanama and all these others, also the princes, the Sakya princes, they also went forth, you see, and they also became monastics at that time. This is still within the first year. After the episodes in Kapilavatthu, then the Buddha apparently walked all the way back to Rajagaha. Now, monks are not allowed to ride horses. They did go in caravans, but that means a caravan is like a caravanserai. It means, you would have had merchants with their merchandise piled up on wagons and on horses and on oxen, perhaps, like this. And then they would be making that journey. Now then, the monks are allowed to join those caravanserais, but they don't travel on the, they don't travel with the animals. They walk. Yeah, it would go at walk pace. It takes a long time to get across the country, of course. But that's an important thing as well, because he went back to Rajagaha. Now that was a major trading centre, and Savatthi in the Kosala country was another major trading centre. Sudatta, who we better know as Anathapindika, took one of his caravans and he went down to Rajagaha, and that's where he was introduced to the Buddha. That's where Anathapindika first met the Buddha, was in Rajagaha, on one of his merchant trips to sell. They would take goods, you see, from Savatthi, what they produced in Savatthi, take them down to Rajagaha, sell them, and then they would buy produce in Rajagaha and take it back up to Savatthi and sell it. And then Anathapindika invited the Buddha to go to Savatthi. And it's said that, he set up way stations. Set up way stations all the way along, so that that means they would have set up tents, you know, where there was food and drinks and cover provided so they could go. Because in fact, now when the Buddha went, he went with all his disciples. That's a lot of people, you see. You can't just go into the village. There's 1,000 disciples or something like that. You can't just go into a small village. There's not enough food. So to get all those monks and everything like that across the back of India, probably 400 kilometers or something like that, he set up way stations along the way so that they would be, I think, every 12 kilometers or something like that. Actually a big expense, you see, to provide food for all these monks all the way along. And then they went along this journey all the way back, probably through Kapilavatthu, and then back to Savatthi. Savatthi actually became the major teaching center. There were 2 monasteries there, Jetavana, which was in the south, and what was actually called the Eastern Monastery. So we know where it was. It was in the east, you see, east of the city. But the first one was Jetavana, which was made by, or bought by, Anathapindika. Originally it was Jeta's. Jeta was a prince in Savatthi, and he had grounds outside the city where he would go and frolic, like these 30 people were frolicking earlier in the thing. So he had these grounds. All the rich people would have grounds outside the city where they could go and relax, and they may have gone hunting as well, you know, hunting, enjoying themselves, going to the rivers, and you know, all these sort of things. So there was some grounds like this that belonged to Jeta, and Anathapindika bought out those grounds. You know the famous story where he put down, they had these golden kahapanas, like golden ringgits if you like, and they put those ringgits on the ground, covered the whole ground, and bought the monastery. And then it was given in dedication from Anathapindika, who's a very rich merchant, of course, because you can't put down money like this if you're not. And then the Buddha gave 30 gathas, 30 verses, praising Anathapindika and telling how good these gifts were. And you know, but these verses also not recorded. There's some verses in the commentary. It gives something like 5 or 6 verses in the commentary, and they're really beautiful, really wonderful, praising generosity and praising, you know, that kind of beautiful state of mind and so on. But the others have been lost by the tradition. You see, now all of this time, while all of this is going on, this is like the first year of the Buddha's thing. All we have is 4 discourses. See, so much was lost. When it got to Jetavana, that's when the story broke off in the early texts. In fact, the story in the early text breaks off earlier. It breaks off at Rajagaha. This story about going to Kapilavatthu, back to Rajagaha, and then over to Savatthi, it comes actually in the later books. That means the Jataka Nidana, the Jataka Introduction, and other books from that era. Doesn't mean it's wrong, of course, but they're not the early books. They're not from the early teachings. So, but when it gets to Savatthi, that's when it breaks off, and then that's when the biography breaks down. And in a way, it's kind of suitable, because once Jetavana had been established, really the Sasana was established. He had major support. As I said, I think for something like 25 was he spent in Savatthi. From the 20th to the 44th range retreat was spent in Savatthi. It became a major center for the teaching, you see. 24 years he spent in that. Some of it was spent at Jetavana, and some of it was spent at the Eastern monastery. The Eastern monastery was Visakha's monastery. Visakha was the main female disciple of the Buddha, and Anathapindika was the main male disciple of the Buddha. So they were both, you see, in Savatthi, and providing big support for the monastics in that area. And it was able, because of that, to support a big monastic community. You see, it's also a major city. You know, it's a major trading city. So there's a lot of people there. So they can also support the thing. But they had two major supporters in that area, so where they could stay in these monasteries. And Visakha, if I remember rightly, one time said that she would provide cloth for the monastics for the rest of her life. So that's the early story, the early biography of the Buddha's life. So there you go. Everybody say sadhu.
The Wayfarers are a Malaysian Buddhist musical group who created a number of popular songs that are still sung today. They wrote songs in both English and Pali, covering mainly themes from the Buddha's teaching and personal reflection. Let us now listen to a Buddhist song by Wayfarers.
In the forest dense and wild, providing shade for fierce and mild, beloved by both man and child, the holy Bodhi stands. In the city's sun-brown heart, where the highways meet and part, beneath whose shade the sparrows dart, the holy Bodhi stands. Down the river's fertile shore, where young meet for Dharma's law, enshrined within a pilgrim door, the holy Bodhi stands. Years by thousands have gone by since that Indian prince did sigh, and where became the Buddha high, the holiest Bodhi stands.
That concludes today's program. If you have any questions about the contents of our broadcast, please feel free to reach out to us at info@bdtv.com. Our dedicated team remains committed to sharing the profound teachings of the Buddha, helping you walk the path of wisdom and enlightenment. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you again next week at the same time. Namo Buddhaya.